CBDCs right now are being used largely because the financial system is imploding. They've been borrowing money since World War II with no intention of paying anything back. And the problem comes that, for example, here in 2024, the interest expenditures are going to be $1 trillion for the year. When Ronald Reagan came to power in 1980, the national debt was $1 trillion. So it's getting completely out of control at this stage in the game. And the way countries default is when you're in these Ponzi schemes, you issue new debt simply to pay off the old. If nobody buys the new debt, then you can't redeem the old one, and that's when the default comes. The state of the fiscal policy in all Western governments is they've been following down this model of just constantly borrowing. And if you go back and you see Keynes, he said during a recession, all right, you can lower taxes, which they never want to do, or go into deficit spending because people are not spending their money, they're saving. So they use that as justification to say, see, we can spend deficit. But then he said that for a recession. And they, have deficit spending during a boom time. And this is why the central banks, which a lot of people blame, are not at fault. They are in a real dilemma because Keynesian economics is no longer working. Raise interest rates to stop inflation. That was, from the 1930s when the government had a balanced budget. So raising interest rates or lowering interest rates affected us directly. Now the government is the biggest borrower. So they raise interest rates to stop inflation. Fine, we spend less. But does anybody in government say, oh, gee, the federal, the central bank wants us to spend less, so let's reduce our spending? Of course not. Yeah. And the interest expenditures go up anyhow. When our interest expenditures this year are going to be $1 trillion in 2024, compared to with the national debt in 1980 was $1 trillion. Rolling this debt, the interest is just going to consume all the spending. That's basically what happens. We've already reached at different points 70% of the spending of the national debt is just interest, accumulative interest, because they never pay anything off. The debt could never possibly be paid back. So this is why throughout history, governments end up defaulting. That in part, that's also why they are promoting war, which is very strange. In the days of Nixon, everybody was interested in world peace. Now everybody wants war. And the main reason they want war is because war is the perfect example and excuse for a default. War is always the means to basically default. You can go buy all the bonds on eBay, etc. from, Europe, because then you form a new government. When you form a new government, that doesn't honor the debts of the last one. Even in the United States, the revolution that we had, they said, oh, we're going to honor the debts of the Continental Congress. They never did. Not once has any government ever paid off the debt of a previous government. They all default. Even if you go to in ancient Greece, the island of Delos, which was kind of like a central bank back then, they have a stela with a list of all the cities that defaulted. And you're going back to 400 BC and they still defaulted. There's no other way out of this. They all end up defaulting. I suppose the best example is what happened to the city of Mainz, M-A-I-N-Z, in Germany. That's where the Gutenberg press was. It was like a big dot-com bubble. And they started borrowing money, anticipating that the tax revenue was never going to decline, always increase. And They started taxing the rich. The rich left, including Gutenberg. And then they couldn't pay off the debt, and so they couldn't sell new debt to pay off the old, and they ended up defaulting. The Pope ended up excommunicating everybody, and the creditors that didn't get paid ended up sacking the city. So there's no good example where this has ever been resolved, even once. They need the CBDCs at this point in time because, first of all, there are no mirrors in Washington or Brussels. We are always the problem. And the official number that I saw from like the Internal Revenue Service is that 35% of us do not pay taxes. So CBDCs are basically the ultimate control. You eliminate cash, and then they think that will eliminate the underground economy. You hire that 16-year-old girl next door to watch the kids while you and your wife go out to dinner, and you gave her $20. Oh my God, she didn't pay taxes. This is the way they think, and I've argued with them. Look, I don't care what you collect. Whatever you collect, you'll always spend more. But they act in their own self-interest, and the whole purpose of the CBDC is to eliminate the underground economy, and they think they're going to increase their tax collection by 35%. And I don't care how much they increase it, it's not going to solve the problem. The CBDCs are not going to solve the end game. Every country, they end up defaulting. And as I said, you can go to the island of Delos, and they list the cities that defaulted, and that was the 400 BC. So nothing's changed. Raising taxes won't cover it because basically capital can always hoard, not invest, and move off. And it's labor that gets, squeezed. Really, that's what happens. They can't hoard their labor. Okay, capital can hoard and refuse to invest. You have basically Biden proposing a 44.6% capital gains tax. So, then what's the point of investing? People won't invest, and then you'll create less jobs. And our computer's showing we're heading into a recession from May of 2024 into 2028. Raising taxes, going to CBDCs, all of this stuff will reduce the economic activity, period. And inflation is not going to subside because we're dealing, a computer showing a decline in economic activity in the West in particular between May 7th of 2024 into 2028. And that will be perpetuated by this insanity of raising taxes that will kill investment by Biden moving to 44.6% on a capital gains tax. Is that really going to happen? People have to understand, when it comes to money, there's no difference between a Democrat and a Republican. To keep the ball going and keep things in line, you just saw what the speaker did. He gave up everything for Ukraine. And then they're waving flags, Ukraine, on the floor of Congress. They lie about everything. If you look at hiring 80,000 IRS agents, the data's already in. Who are they auditing? People under 200,000. Yeah. Why? Because if you have a serious business, you have lawyers and accountants to do all that. All right? You don't. It's the small business guy that does it himself, whatever, and those are the people they're after. It's not Bill Gates and Warren Buffett. They always sounds nice. Janet Yellen, well, we're going bring the auditing down to $600, and I don't think Elon Musk is selling a used bike on eBay for $600. If we look objectively throughout history, why did communism fail? All right. Most people don't know, but Vladimir Lenin actually wanted to model the Soviet Union after the United States. That all these different states would be independent, retain their sovereignty, and could secede if they wanted. Stalin, it's widely assumed that Stalin actually poisoned Lenin and to seize control, and Lenin had actually written a letter, "Do not let Stalin succeed me." And he was...
But to get to the same reason, it fell because...
It was Stalin who then seized all control to a centralized government. All right, when you have a centralized government dictating to everybody, they never succeed. Because we have different cultures. Even in the United States. I mean, California, they'll have an abortion up to 1 month before the baby's born. That offends people in the Bible Belt. You have, although a United States, we have basically 4 different types of economies and 4 in different cultures. You can't dictate and say, now I have power because I was elected with 52.9% of the vote, so therefore now it's my turn to oppress everybody else. That's not civilization. The debt is moving exponentially now. The Federal Reserve, as I said, with Keynesian economics, has lost control. If they raise interest rates to fight inflation, what happens? Government expenditure increases. Keynesian economics has failed. As I said, the theory was put forth during the Great Depression when the federal government had a balanced budget. So you raised interest rates, it affected us directly. Today, the government is the biggest borrower. So if the Fed raises interest rates to try and reduce inflation, we may contract, but it has no impact upon the government other than the interest expenditures can continue to rise. Mm-hmm. So there's no way out of this. The Fed cannot possibly solve the problem because it's not the problem. The problem is simply the government fiscal spending, over which no central bank has control. This is the whole purpose of the CBDCs. A lot of people understand it's more control, but it's worse than that. Okay, they see it as the means to collect more money. They think they'll be able to collect more taxes by 35%. But I don't care if you take 100% of all the money Bill Gates has, Soros, and everybody else. You don't even balance the budget for a year. I mean, it's beyond repair at this stage. So the CBDCs is more an attempt to gain absolute control. Capital controls, they can literally, it's completely programmable. Mm-hmm. They don't want you to donate money to Trump, because he's anti-democratic or whatever. They can prevent you from donating any money to any particular politician they want. Capital controls, what they will do if there's a war in Europe with Ukraine and Russia, they'll put capital controls on so you can't take your money out of Europe. These are the things that they have always attempted to do. All right, but with CBDCs, it will be 100%. This is the ultimate goal of government that, like I say, they never look at themselves. It's always we are the enemy. Honestly, we need term limits because you're never going to have a government by the people or for the people as long as there is a perpetual political class. The solution here has been often clouded because you have a lot of people pointing the fingers at the Federal Reserve. And it's just nonsense. The Federal Reserve is not the problem. All right, it is the only thing that is functioning, actually. And people don't know the history, but in World War II, the government said, okay, we're going to war, so the Fed was directed and complied with putting a cap on interest rates, so interest rates didn't rise dramatically during World War II. Then the White House asked them to do it again for the Korean War, and the Fed refused. We're not going to do this all the time. And so that was the big rift. It made front page news back then. And the Federal Reserve refused to follow the White House. So just in December 23, and you have to understand central banks, when Powell came out and said the spending is unsustainable, this is the first time the Federal Reserve has publicly criticized the White House since 1951. The central bank cannot prevent this, cannot deal with it, because they have no control over the fiscal spending, period. So if you want a stable government, it has to be a government that is not allowed to borrow money, because they will always borrow money to bribe the people to retain power. All right, we need term limits to return the government to the people by the people, where you're there and say, okay, fine, looks good on your resume. I did my 2 years in Congress. I donated my time for the nation. This is what you need, and we have to understand that when the founding fathers created it, Congress would only meet a few weeks of the year. It wasn't full time. That started more after 1820 or so, and then to get salaries, that's how they got people to sign on with the North during the Lincoln era in the Civil War. Vote for us, and we'll give you a salary all year long. And so your permanent salaries came in the 1850s. Before then, there was no, you donated your time to the country. So once you now create a political class, they will do whatever they need to do to retain that power. I mean, if you pay them, they were paid on a per diem basis before then. You have to have people that are there for a real reason, they get there and they end up with this whole issue of just how much money can I get out of it. I mean, like when the Clintons left the White House, they stole furniture. I mean, come on. It was a gift no, it was to the country, not to you. But this is unfortunately what we have. We have politicians that, it's like going into, renting a room in a hotel, and you don't take just the soup, the soap, you take the bed too. I think that you have to understand the reason they're moving to CBDCs is because the fiscal side of this monetary system is collapsing. You have, unfortunately, and not to be political, but the reason they want Biden is because he's in Delaware 40% of the time, and this allows the agencies, unelected, to do whatever they want. And he should be there. A president's role in these cabinet meetings is to be the referee. Mm-hmm. So here you have the State Department in the hands of these neocons, threatening world war against everybody, including China. And China happens to be the largest holder of U.S. debt. Mm-hmm. So then you end up with Janet Yellen having to hop on a plane to go to China and say, please continue to buy our debt. Look, the fiscal spending is out of control. And as I've said, the way governments default is when you can't sell the new debt. So you have like the State Department threatening China, which is the largest holder of debt. If they don't continue to buy debt, two things happen. One, interest rates go up, making the deficits here worse. And eventually, if you can't sell the bonds, you default. So that's what the CBDCs are really about. Total control. They think that you won't be able to move your money. They'll get 35% more in taxes. It's basically because the fiscal side of the budget is out of control. The only possible solution to this, and let's be realistic, is that government cannot possibly be allowed to borrow. They're just not trustworthy, period. They'll never pay it off, and once they start tapping into it, they will continue. Sir Isaac Newton, that's once they start borrowing, they will just continue. That's Gresham's law. Gresham was representing the English crown in the Amsterdam market. And as the English crown was debasing its currency, nobody would lend to it, because if they got repaid, the currency would be worth less than it was before. That was Gresham's law. He saw what was happening. This is what's happening right now. As inflation continues to go, when you buy a 10-year bond, what's it going to buy 10 years from now when they repay you? I met with the Treasury back in 1980 when Paul Volcker had raised these interest rates to insane levels. And I met with them and I said, guys, the national debt's going to double in less than 10 years. And they very calmly said to me, yes, Marty, but we'll be paying back with cheaper dollars. The only solution here is government is not allowed to borrow, and we have to stop this Marxist agenda of that's what brought down communism. When I was young, the thing that struck me about history was that all these empires rose and fell, and they were all buried in a common grave. Individually, we learn, because we take our finger, we stick it into the flame of a candle. Even though our parents says, hey, don't do that, it's going to hurt, we still do it. It hurts, we don't do it again, and then we tell our child not to do it, and they do it, all right? We learn from our mistakes individually, but collectively, society never learns. They always end up with the same situation. Our government will fail. Republicans are forms of government is the most corrupt because everybody's for sale. Even a dictatorship and a monarchy are less corrupt because you can't bribe them. But when we have supposed representatives, they're all up for sale. That's what basically brought down Rome. So collectively, we don't learn. And as a result, government will never, ever hand back power. We are in a situation where the fiscal budgets are just out of control and will continue to get out of control. So the CBDCs, for example, are a means to impose control to try and retain that power longer. All right, but it will fail. And then what happens is it breaks up. You cannot impose a single rule, one size fits all for everybody. If we look at history, you'll see it's the same pattern over and over and over again. It has been quite remarkable, and even Paul Volcker, a former head of the Federal Reserve, came out and said, yes, the business cycle is about 8 years. And so we're looking at a decline from May 7th, which will continue into 2028, but you're going to see inflation rising because of shortages, The first bottom is going to be 2028. Then you go up into 2032, and after that we get to redesign government. War, inflation, stagflation into 2028.
So we're fucked for 4 years.
Yes.
Then there's a little glimmer of hope between then and 2032?
A little bit, not much. That's when they'll try and push the one world government as the solution, blah, blah, blah. And that will fail, and then we get to redesign everything when that fails.
And the model's pretty clearly showing that?
Oh yeah, it's inevitable.
Okay.
Look, our model is basically showing that we're turning down after May 7th into 2028 economically. That will be a recession with rising inflation, mainly from shortages, what we then would call that inflation will be greater than the economic growth. Okay, so you're looking at stagflation. After that, there'll be a bounce, which will be more or less attempt to create a one world government with the United Nations, etc. That will fail. Our model is basically showing that after May 7th, we're going into a recessionary trend into 2028. This is going to be because of raising taxes, CBDCs that they're trying to put into control the economy, which will fail. And at that stage in the game, we're looking at what we call stagflation, because they're also looking at creating wars. So the economic growth will be less than the inflationary growth, which is stagflation. After that, there'll be a bounce with the United Nations trying to say, see, we are the solution, one world government, stop wars, blah, blah, blah. That will fail. And then after that, which will be 2032, after that we get to redesign government ourselves. And hopefully this time we learn from our past mistakes. People individually learn from their mistakes. Like I said, you can tell a child, don't stick your finger in the flame. Everybody sticks their finger in the flame. They know it hurts and they don't do it again. So individually we learn from our past mistakes, but collectively we do not. Okay, collectively society does not learn, which is why all civilizations have risen and fallen, and they're all buried in this single common grave. Our system basically is out of control. The government spending is reckless. Powell, the Federal Reserve Chairman, I believe in December 23, had came out and said this is unsustainable, and it's very correct. I mean, the central bank cannot control the fiscal side of spending. And this is what CBDCs are all about, because they know that one, it's out of control, and two, that basically they think that moving to 100% control with the CBDC, they will collect 35% more in taxes. They'll eliminate the underground economy. That's not going to solve anything. And once you end up doing that, you'll create discord, and eventually the United States just will break up into at least 3 regions. The same thing will happen in Canada, probably East versus West. Europe will also break up and going back to the states that they were. Andrew Jackson basically shut down the central bank and the Bank of the United States, and created, the panic of 1837, the Great Depression, sovereign defaults of states. All right, they were called the hard times tokens. All right, collectors, collect these things. They're political tokens because there was a shortage of money. All right, this is from that period in time. What happens when they move to a CBDC? All right, it will create discord and divide the countries apart. Europe will break apart back to where they were. Canada will split east versus west. The United States will break up at least into 3 sections. All right, this is not something that's new. When Andrew Jackson shut down the central bank, you ended up with the panic of 1837, and private money appeared then. Okay, and these are called the hard times tokens. I mean, a lot of them are political, very interesting. Collectors collect these things, assigning blame to various people. Most people don't realize during the Great Depression, all right, there's such a shortage of cash. Over 200 cities issued their own money. Here's a catalog on that. People aren't aware that these things took place. You have, no matter what period in time, you know, from the Civil War, and you're looking at the private counties issuing, companies issuing. The same thing happened after World War I in Germany. It's called Notgeld. Notgeld meaning not government money, it was private companies that were issuing it. So these things have been taking place of always. Human nature doesn't change, okay? And this is what happens. So the CBDCs will facilitate the breakup of the United States because you cannot impose a one-size government and rules upon everyone. That's why the Soviet Union collapsed. It was Lenin who wanted independent states as a confederation. It was Stalin that brought them together and imposed a dictatorial rule on everyone, and that basically collapses. So this is what will happen. Even if you take the issue of abortion, you know, California will allow you to have an abortion right up to, you know, 1 month before. The other states, you know, the Bible states are against it. You have different cultures. It's not that somebody's right or somebody's wrong. This is their belief systems, okay? And you can't change that. Even if you look at Ukraine, you see the same problem. You have Zelensky saying that they, you know, can't speak their own native language of Russian. They have to speak Ukrainian. Then says you can't be subservient to the Patriarch of Moscow. You have to, you know, be subservient to his patriarch in Kiev. And then even went as far as to outlaw Christmas. He says you can't celebrate Orthodox Christmas. You have to go to December 25th because that's what I've decided we're going to do here in the West. You can't do these sorts of things. When you start messing with people's languages and cultures and things of this nature, countries break up and end up in civil war. And you just take, you know, Canada, if they tried to outlaw French, I think Canada's going to end up in the Civil War. Could the United States simply come up and say, you know, we're going to outlaw Spanish and everybody has to speak English? I mean, I don't think these things would go over very well. So you have to understand that we do not learn from our mistakes. If we look at history, the only possible solution is the government must be banned from borrowing money. All right, because government will only act in its own self-interest. They will never hand back power. They're incapable of ever paying off debts. That's why they always default. Yet every time they say, oh, this time is different. It's not, never has been. So the only solution is effectively to prevent governments from borrowing. Then we at least stand a chance. You have to eliminate career politicians. There has to be we, the people who actually run the government. They claim we live in a democracy when we do not. We're not asked, shall we go to war against Russia or China? Would they just do it? And then we're drafted, and if you don't show up, they throw you in prison. You know, that was the big problem with Vietnam. You were 18 years old, you could get drafted to go die for your country, but you were too young to have a drink or vote. That's not exactly democracy. So going through this period, we're going to have to realize that there is nobody there for us. Government is not the solution. The government is not going to be there to take care of you like Santa Claus. We are looking at government is collapsing. So our form of Republican governments will collapse. Then we get to redesign it after 2032. All right. Let's at least learn from our mistakes and history just for once. It would be nice. All right. And just look at how have all these empires, nations and city-states fallen. Why? Ask the question. Why? Has it worked before? All right. They've never asked that question with any emergency committee. How do we solve this issue? So individually, we're going to have to hunker down, understand what we're facing. There is a light at the end of the tunnel. Understand what that light is about. It's not a train coming. All right. And if we learn from our mistakes, then we can redesign government and leave something to our children and grandchildren instead of absolute chaos. City of Newark. So cities, counties, they issued money when there effectively was no other choice. There were shortages of cash going around.
What's the significance of these, do you think?
Significance is that human nature never changes. So the CBDCs will cause us to basically split up. And as we split up, you'll see different states issuing their own money. And that will be the resolution to this situation. For the immediate period of time, that will be the resolution to this immediate crisis. Once you remove physical money from people, which has been in use since 1000 BC, this is quite an interesting experiment, and it's not going to survive. History will stand as witness to show that this is absurd, and it's a dictatorial type of real tyranny. They think that they can survive by taking absolute 100% control over everybody's life, what you're allowed to buy. They don't want you buying a gun. They can just block it. They don't want you donating to somebody like Trump. They block it. They can do whatever they want with the CBDC, and that's what you're going to see. And that is basically what is going to cause people to break up, move into individual currencies as the solution. These are currencies issued here by the County of Atlanta in New Jersey, paying to the bearer.
During 1933?
Yes, these are all from the 1930s, because there was a shortage of money around. Because what the shortage takes place when you go into a recession, and then people don't want to spend; they save because they don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And that's why, like the central bank in Europe went to negative interest rates in 2014 to try and force people to spend. So what did they do? They took the money out of the bank. You can't force people to do something that is against common sense. And that is what they've always done, and it has always failed. And that's what the states and cities and counties will be able to issue their own money, and that's the resolution to a CBDC.
Is that a hopeful message, or?
I think so. That they're not going to survive. CBDC is not going to be what they think they're going to accomplish with it. The government is going to think that they can force everybody into their agenda with a CBDC, and this is the solution to it. You will see private currencies take place, and people will use even gold coins, silver coins, anything from a physical perspective. I mean, when they put people in prison, what became money? Packages of cigarettes. You cannot prevent, even in a prison economy evolves. The cryptocurrencies, I believe, Bitcoin was most likely created by the government to sell this idea of a CBDC. They're not the solution. They're not a store of wealth. They can basically seize anything because it's not tangible. If anything that you want to be able to protect is going to have to be in physical form. A cryptocurrency is not an alternative to the central bank. That's all propaganda. And they can eliminate it with the stroke of a pen. Once they accomplish the CBDCs, and what they're really doing with it is having the banks create it. Banks are already subject to their rules, whereas a bank has to file suspicious activity reports. A bank can look at whatever you're doing and tell the government you just sent money to this person who looks suspicious. Whereas the Federal Reserve will not do so, all right, because they would need a search warrant to look inside your account and who's doing what. The bank doesn't need a search warrant, it just reports what you're doing. So therefore the CBDCs will be regulated by the central bank, but they will actually be private. And people will think that's safe. It's not. It's even worse. As the government attempts to force CBDCs upon everybody, there will be the resolution of going to private as they break up the country, because people are going to see that this is a very dictatorial type of system. So what will happen at that stage in the game is that people are going to look for alternatives, and that's what all these private, currencies have done during the American Revolution, the Civil War, and the Great Depression. There's plenty of these things that have existed. I mean, you have also private coins being issued going back during the Panic of 33 AD. I mean, so human nature does not change. All right, we will look for an alternative, we will create an alternative, and the CBDC system will be defeated. People will move to private currencies. I mean, coins even exist from 33 AD, from the panic at that point, private coinage. People will respond, and the CBDCs will collapse. This is inevitable. They will fail to be able to control society, and this will be the end of that, and will take down with it the governments, and we'll get to redesign government fresh all over again, just as the Founding Fathers did in 1776.